Okay, so this video is a complete guide to endgames where one side has a piece and the other side has a pawn. I've made studies on this topic, which are linked in the Google Doc, and this is sort of um, an alternative presentation of that. So we're going to look at endgames where it's a queen against a pawn, a rook against a pawn, very briefly a bishop against a pawn, and then a knight against a pawn. And I think this topic is interesting, first of all, because I think that a lot of experienced players sort of feel like they understand uh, pretty much everything there is to know about. I'm speaking for myself. I thought I knew everything about queen versus pawn in games, for example, and I found out there were a lot of things that I was not familiar with. Um, And also, it's sort of a topic where given we have 4 units on the board, it's possible to sort of complete everything. If you took, for example, rook endgames as your topic, you're only gonna be able to, like, within a Lichess study or a video, for example, cover a relatively small piece of the broad topic of rook and pawn endgames. Whereas here, I think we can cover basically everything. Everything you need to know, and realistically, actually more than you do need to know. I've covered up the notation panel just in case you wanted to pause at some point and try to work out what's happening. Um, and I've got my notes open in another thing here. Right. So we're gonna start with the queen versus pawn end games. Again, like I said, this is something that at one point I felt like I knew everything about, but I very much didn't. It's not quite as simple as rook and bishop pawn with the pawn on the seventh is a draw, other pawns are a win. Um, and these things can become fairly intricate. We're gonna start basically from scratch from some very simple examples and move into to more advanced topics. There are examples here that's sort of based on the chapter, well, this whole video, is based on the chapters from Jesus de la Villa's book, 100 Endgames You Must Know. But it's certainly not a one-to-one replication, and there are, um, I have additional examples, and this is I sort of go in more detail because those endgames are sort of my exclusive topic, whereas he was covering endgames as a whole. Okay, so we're gonna start, like I said, with queen versus pawn. And okay, for these positions to realistically be competitive, the pawn has to be pretty close to queening with support from the king. And okay, but before I start, actually, I think all of these examples pretty much will um, have white as the side with the piece and black as the side with the pawn. And instead of always specifying the attacking side needs to do this or the defending side needs to do this, I'm just gonna say white just as a blanket term for the side with the piece. Just so to sort of economize on words. Anyway, these positions being competitive, it relies on white not having direct access to the queening square. Like if we can block the pawn, uh, it's pretty irrelevant. Like for example, what file it stands on and stuff like that. Like here, white can play queen a1, and there's pretty much nothing more to discuss. And okay, if the pawn is further back, like we'll see some positions with the pawn on the sixth rank. Most of this portion is pawns on the seventh. If it's further back, I mean, there's not really a ton to talk about. The queen wins pretty easily. But yeah, like I said, in this case, we can get in front of the pawn, and there's not a ton more to discuss. We can pretty comfortably bring our king closer while black shuffles between a3 and b3. And yeah, there's not a ton more to talk about. Okay, so we'll look now at a more competitive example. I mean, this is something that I assume that most sort of, I guess, post beginner players will know about. In this case, we don't have access to the front of the pawn. The king is close enough to at least make it kind of interesting. Black is threatening to promote, and we don't have an extremely quick way of winning the game immediately. But again, so in this case, we'll see that generally speaking, Black would rather have a rook or a bishop's pawn, so an A, C, F or H pawn than a knight's pawn or a center pawn, so a B, D, E, or G pawn. and we'll discuss why that is later. But yeah, this sort of situation, as long as you can start by giving a check or pinning the pawn, like as long as you can do something to prevent immediately e1 queens, it's pretty winning for white, essentially regardless of where the king is. Like we'll see with other pawns, it matters how close the king is, as far as whether you can win or not. But here, we can put the king basically as far away as you want, and white will win. So we need to use a series of checks slash pinning the pawn. Eventually, we're going to force the king to go in front of its own pawn. And once we have reprieve from black threatening promotion, we can take that opportunity to bring the king closer. Then the cycle repeats, and the king comes until it's close enough to give mate and or capture the pawn. Okay, so we'll start with a check. I mean, this sequence is not too precise in the sense that you can do this with a number of different moves, but this is essentially the pattern. King c2, queen c4 check. We'll go to d2, queen d4 check, uh, king c2, and now the important maneuver is queen e3, attacking the pawn and preventing it from queening. King to d1, and now queen d3 check, which forces the king to king z1. The pawn will drop immediately. So you have to go king e1. Now that the king is in front of the pawn, we can come closer with our king with king g7. And once black's king comes out from in front of the pawn, we can repeat the same sequence again. So king f2, queen d2. I mean, pinning the pawn is useful. Not the only move that wins, of course. King f1, queen f4 check, king here. I mean, it's the same thing if you go king g2, queen e3. It's the same. Queen e3 check, king f1, queen f3 check. Again, king f1 drops the pawn. King goes here. King f6, king here. Queen f2, again, not the only winning move, but it's useful to be able to pin the pawn. King d1, queen d4 check here, check. And then the same thing continues to repeat itself. Gotta go back in front of the pawn. King here, queen f2. And okay, this next bit is not strictly necessary, but it's good to get used to the concept of allowing the pawn to queen, given that we have checkmate on the next move. And the thematic way of doing that is king d3. Okay, promoting to a knight is check. It avoids getting mated on the next turn, but it does not survive for very long. Promoting to a queen runs into queen c2 mate, and like I said, this is a very thematic sort of uh, yeah, sort of setup of the pieces that we'll see more later on. So that was with the center pawn. Against the knight's pawn, you can win in pretty much the same way. Again, regardless of of where our king is, as long as we can do something on this turn to prevent the pawn from queening. Which I mean, regardless of where you place the king, there's always going to be a check or a pin. So we'll just go through the sequence quickly. Queen f6, queen g5. We'll bring the queen a little closer, then we can go here, here, force the king in front of the pawn. It's actually a little bit easier here in a situation like this, because there's no other file for the king to go to on the other side. So um, you can get the king in front of its own pawn a little bit quicker, which is nice, I guess. Then we can bring the king closer, queen here, check. Again, the specific moves are not too important. And okay, here's another example. This is not strictly necessary, but again, um, it's good to be aware of these types of patterns. After king h4, if they promote to a queen, queen to h3 is mate. Okay, so those are examples with a center pawn and a nice pawn, which we'll see even in quite good conditions for black, where the pawn is on the seventh, the king like is right next to it, controlling the queen and square, and white's king is very far away. Even under those, quite good circumstances for the side with the pawn, white wins quite easily. Before we move on to rooks and knights pawns, we're going to take a look at one sort of exception where black actually draws with a pawn coming to the seventh. And basically, the issue is what I said earlier. As long as white is able to actually prevent black from queening by giving a check or pinning the pawn, and here we'll see a quick exception to that. So the position that we'll see at the very end of this line, it comes from De La Via, and he notes that that position can occur at the end of kind of a pawn race. So I mean, I've sort of retracted a few moves to show this. So obviously both sides don't really have anything productive to do besides push their pawns. So c6, e4, c7, e3, c8, queen, e2, and yeah, you can put White's king um on a lot of other squares, and it would be winning for White. But in this case, White actually just doesn't have a move that prevents e1 queen. There are no checks. There's no pinning the pawn. These cases are not very common. It's not impossible that they crop up, but this is very much the exception to the rule among a sea of positions where the queen wins. Now, we're going to get into some more interesting cases where yeah, there are more sort of precise details involved. And we'll start with a rook pawn. Also, there's another special case with bishop's pawn. We'll start with rook pawns. Due to the proximity of the edge of the board, these provide black with good drawing resources. And it actually now starts to matter how close White's king actually is to the action. Now, these green circles that I've made here, those are the squares. If White's king stood on those squares, we'd be winning. And outside of those squares, we are not winning. And obviously that's with White to move. If it were Black to move, they would draw with h1 queen. And like Delavia says, it doesn't make a ton of sense to try to memorize this, but it's more important to understand what White is playing for and why why those squares in particular, like why d1 or e5 is close enough. Anyway, the king is obviously far outside the sort of winning zone, so this is a draw, and I'll show you why. Um, and it's because, well, we'll make some moves. Queen g7 check. We'll assume that White is trying to follow the same path that we did in the previous examples to try to win the game. And actually, okay, Black can go for king h1 straight away. But we'll assume this sequence continues for a little bit, as though we're pretending that it's one of the previous examples. Once you get here, instead of, well, okay, king f1 would drop the pawn, obviously, so he's forced to go in front of the pawn. And the issue for White is that this is a generous exclamation mark, but um, yeah, normally in the previous instances, the second where Black's king steps in front of its pawn, it's a moment we can bring our king closer. However, moving the king would be stalemate. So White actually just has no way to make progress. He would have to continue whatever queen e1 check, and they would just keep giving checks, and yeah, there's no way to get the king closer with a stalemate. So let's look at an example where the king is closer. So this is the same as the previous one, but we've just brought the king closer, and this is within the winning zone. It's well within the winning zone. Like I said, the king can be as far away as e5 or d1, and it would still be a win. But you can win this pretty simply. For example, queen b2 check. And here, okay, first of all, going to h1 does not help. You're not stalemated. On king g3, you're mated after only legal move king g1, and it's okay, queen b1 mate. So king g1, and now, I mean, the most straightforward way to win is king g3. And this is, again, it's a recurring theme. This where you have the king and queen here. It can be sort of translated over a few ranks. The king and queen here, the king here, and we're giving mate with this. Or, I mean, okay, if they're queening, there are four different mates in one. But yeah, so that okay. With that example, White is winning pretty easily. So now we'll put the king on d4. Uh, we're still in the winning zone, and the reason why we're still in the winning zone is because we can access the square e3 in one move, which will allow queen to f2 mate. So let's see how that works. Queen g7 check. Um, king f2. Now, if they go to h1 immediately, yeah, you can do something like you can continue with queen f6. I mean, you got to come out here. If you just like continue to insist that you're going to go this way, you can do something like this here, and then at a certain point, like queen here, here. If you like continue to insist that you want to do it this way, okay. I mean, one way to do it is by going queen here, king here. I don't know if this is the fastest way to do it, but yeah, you go king here, and then again you have the situation where queening gets checkmated. So, okay. That's if black just wants to go to the corner straight away. King to f2, queen f6. Again, we give checks to bring the king closer. Okay, strictly speaking, king e3 is the fastest way to do it here. Um, h1 queen, queen g4, and you end up in one of these situations where after king to h2, white has king f2, and you get this sort of typical situation where the king and queen are stuck on the edge, and black really has no way to avoid getting mated. We'll see these types of examples again, but okay, the simplest way to do it here is queen g4 check. Okay, if again, like I said, like I showed before, here one way you can win is queen f3 followed by king e3. So king f2 here, queen g3. Sorry, king g1, queen g3, and now on king h1, which is pretty forced again, queen f3 and king e3, and on h1 equals queen, queen f2 is mate. So that's why having the king on d4 in the starting position is within the winning zone. Again, if you sort of reflect this to the other side, where you have rook and king, like it takes a little bit of sort of mental effort, but you can sort of you don't even have to construct the winning zone on the other side, but you can see, for example, if the king is on e4, it has access to d3, and therefore, once the king is on b1 and once black is queened, you have queen c2 mate. So again, it's not about because this can be flipped to the other side. So just going straight by memory doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's more about understanding what exactly you need the king to do and whether any given square will be close enough to actually serve that function. Now, with the king on e5, which does seem pretty far away. Um, by the way, I don't think I have an example here with the king on d1, but it's kind of a similar thing because you have access to e2 and you can give mate with queen f2 in the end. Okay, so with the king on e5, here's how we win. We don't have like direct access to a square where we control f2, but here's how we win. Queen g7, king f2, queen f6. We'll use sort of a normal procedure. Here, um, here, here. Okay, so obviously we can't move our king closer because it's stalemate, but we can set up a mating net, and here's how we do that. Queen e1, king g2, queen here, um, king g1. I mean, again, like if you try to go up, you can't allow this. So king g1, and now it's the theme that I mentioned before, where we sort of stick the black king and queen to the back rank, and we bring our king close enough that we threaten mate, and there's actually not anything they can do about it. And it's king f4, and that's why also the king being on these squares f5, g5, h5 will win because you can bring the king to the fourth rank, and then you can subsequently bring it to g3 and it'll be a mating net because I mean white's threatening three different mates in one, and there's nothing black can do about it to avoid getting mated in the next little bit. Now, let's go back to a different situation. If you'll remember, d5 is actually outside the winning zone. Like you can't draw it like this. You have to draw it like sorry, like this. And the king on d5 is not actually close enough to win. And I'm actually not going to show any moves here, but I'll just explain the reason why. Um, it's because the king cannot. Um, we need to either be able to essentially access a square that covers f2 in one turn, or alternatively, we need to be able to access g3 in 2 turns. We can't access g3 in 2 turns. It would take 3 turns to get there, so we're not in time. And we don't have immediate access to here. So let's say, I mean, just for example, we can make some moves on the board. I said I wasn't going to show any moves, but whatever. Let's just throw some stuff on the board here, here. And yeah, you would need to be able to play. So if you tried this, it doesn't work because yeah, you just aren't close enough to set up this thing that you need to do. So d5 is not a good enough square, but basically any square where you can, like, you'll see, for example, if you go back to, let's quickly go back to the one where I drew the shape. Um, like, okay, squares here are sort of obviously close enough because you're just very close. From d3 here, these squares on the d file, you can go to e3 in one turn and you can set up queen f2 mate. Same with e4. On these squares here, you can get to g3 and do the mating net where the king is here, the queen is here, and our queen is somewhere here. But d5 doesn't allow you to do any of that. And anything past here, you're not even close to being able to achieve anything. Okay, so the next thing, and actually the last thing for this queen versus rook's pawn on the seventh um, example is this, which is sort of a funny trick. Um, and in this case, the king is not in the winning zone. So this position is a draw, but with the king here, you do have potential for a little trick. Queen g6, and here black should play king to f2. But if they go king h1, and the reason is after king f2, um, white has no potential to bring the king closer. You can't move the king right now. They will just queen. And continuing queen f5, queen g4, and whatever doesn't achieve anything. But king h1, thematic may it be, is a mistake. And that's because white can actually approach with his king to g5. And it's not stalemate because you're blocking the queen. And um, white has managed to unstalemate black's king. So you get in this move for free, and you are now inside the winning zone. So white has now managed to trick black into a position where we actually win. King g2, and for example, king f4. Okay, on king h1, one way to win is king g3, king g1, queen b1 mate. On king f2, you can continue queen c2 check. Again, this wins, king e3 wins. Uh, Actually, it's sort of funny that even king f3 wins, even though black and queen would check because you set up this mating net, but okay, the king g3. And then on h1 queen, we saw this position before, you have four different mates in one. Okay, so that's the rook pawn. Uh, yeah, you got to be aware of the stalemate ideas because of the proximity to the edge of the board. Um, Bishop pawn is a little bit more confusing, at least it can be. Now, I've sketched the winning zone for a queen against a bishop pawn. It gives black a special resource to draw the game. Um, I'll start by showing that trick, and it's essentially only that trick that makes a bishop pawn special, and we'll come to it in a moment. In this specific case, again, just to reiterate, it's very important. The pawn is very far advanced. The king is with it. We don't have the opportunity to just access the f1 square with white. So I've drawn the winning zone here, which is definitely more haphazard looking than the other one. But we'll start by, again, don't memorize this. Well, if you can memorize it, then whatever. But you'll have to sort of. I mean, it confuses me. It confuses me sometimes when we try to, because you'll have to do it with the pawn in the C file as well, or when you reverse colors, and um, that can get confusing in my head. So if you want to memorize it, whatever. But I don't suggest doing that. Um, but yeah, okay. The king on h8 again. Unlike center pawns and knights pawns, it matters where the king is, and the king is way too far away to win the game here with white. So I'll show you the trick that enables black to draw if we follow the same method. For example, queen e6 check, king d2. Along the way, black can draw with other king moves, but whatever. We'll just follow the pattern. Uh, you could even, I mean, you could even sort of waste the move by going in front of your pawn, but that's because the king is so far away. But that's illogical. King d2, queen d5 check, king to e2, queen e4, king d2, queen f3, king e1, queen to e3 check, and king f1. So white has seemingly gotten somewhere for the time being. He's gotten the king to step in front of the pawn once, which enables white to take one step with his king, but it's still not close enough. While we're here, we'll come back to this later. I'll mention that it was kind of inconvenient for black to start with the king on the e file rather than the g file. Um, because black would like to be on the side that's closer to the corner. In this case, the king is so far away it doesn't matter, but sometimes it can matter whether the king is on the happy side or the sad side. King g2, and we can continue. For example, queen g5, king here, queen h4, king here. So we'll get to a situation where, in previous examples, the king was forced to go in front of the pawn, but here it's actually not. It can go to the corner because taking on f2 would be stalemate. So white does not get, assuming black plays reasonably, white does not get any further opportunities to put the king to put black's king in front of its pawn. Therefore, white never really gets a rest from stopping f1 queen, and therefore you never got an opportunity to bring your king closer, and therefore the game is a draw. So that's the drawing resource, is the king being in the corner and taking the pawn is stalemate. Here we'll see an example where white's king starts very close. Again, so in the study, I explained that the being in the side that's farther from the corner is the wrong side for the side with your pawn. Um, and we'll start with a few examples where the king is on the wrong side, and then we'll go. Um, with the king on this side, it gives white essentially one free move because you don't have the stalemate resource until your king's on the other side. So you get like um one attempt to pass go, because you can make the king go to f1, but you can only do it once. Like I said, in this case, the king is so close that it doesn't even really matter. Um, but we'll see cases where it does matter going forward. Um, yeah, I like I said here, the king is close enough that you can win in a bunch of different ways. Queen g2, king e1, king e3 wins. This is simple enough. Queen 2, a2, king e1. You don't even have to bother going through the whole loop of forcing the king in front of its pawn, because it's just going to be mate right away with this pattern. Okay, so we'll put the king a little farther away now. We'll put it on h5, which is sort of barely inside the winning zone. I've shown what the winning zone looks like again. And here's why this works. And this wouldn't, yeah, it wouldn't necessarily work if the king were on the other side, but okay. The reason why h5 is close enough is because you can one time, like I said, one time you can make the king go in front of its pawn. You use that opportunity to bring the king one move closer, so you can get it to g4. Then you can get it to g3, and then you can give mate with after f1 queen. You can give mate with queen h2. So here's what that looks like. For example, queen to g2, king e1, check. Here, check. You got to go in front of the pawn. Now white gets their one free move with their king to go to g2, to g4 rather, and now you're close enough to win, like we've seen before. King g2, queen e2, king g1, and the very thematic king g3, queen, and checkmate. Okay, so we'll see another example of the king on the wrong side. Again, seemingly the b4 square is miles away, but because this is situated like it is, it's close enough to win because it's only one square away from c3. And then you can set up a situation with king e1, f1 queen, queen d2 mate. So that's essentially what we're doing in most of these cases. We're thinking in terms of being able to set up mate um, generally on this one diagonal square away from the king, supported by this king after the pawn is queened. So that's what we're thinking of in terms of what our king actually needs to do to determine whether it's close enough or not. In this case, we can win very simply. Queen g2, king here, here, and promoting to a queen would get checkmated in one move. Um, we'll look at one more example with the king on the wrong side of the pawn, and here again, this is wrong from black's perspective. And in this exact situation where we can't like pin the pawn from this side, it becomes a little bit more difficult. A position sort of equivalent to this is presented by De La Via, and I've sort of altered it to fit in with our other examples. But here's how we do it: queen check, and okay, let's just say that black is trying to get onto the wrong side as soon as possible. He's like, okay, you can have your one tempo, but I'm gonna get to the other side. Now, here it's very easy to make a mistake with white. And in pretty much all the examples we've seen before, if it's not stalemate, when the king goes in front of the pawn, we want to bring our king closer. But actually, king c3 would be a big mistake. Now, after king g2, white's king, as it turns out, is not within the winning zone for the king being on the right side of the pawn. And like, if we think in terms of what we actually need the king to do, we'll see that with the king on this side, for example, like if we wanted to play um, queen e2, king g1, king f4 to g3, if that were a move, f1 queen, queen h2 mate. Our king is not close enough to do that. So we actually can't allow this situation. And the move that white actually needs to play is queen to g5, which is a very smart move. Because it prevents the king from getting away to where it actually wants to go. So it's got to go back to the center. Um, and now, okay, king e2 would be a situation we saw before. You can win very easily by doing this. If king to e1 instead, then you can actually, because of where the queen is, you can right away play king here because queening runs into queen d2 mate, and that's essentially the essence of what white is trying to set up in order to win the game with a king that's like within the winning zone, but it's not so far away. But it's not, sorry, it's not so close that the win is completely obvious without even thinking about it. That's what we're generally aiming for. Now, with the king on the correct side, the space gets much smaller. The winning zone is very small. Um, for some reason, okay, I didn't include. I mean, e2 should be inside the winning zone, obviously, because the king can legally stand on that square and you can play queen f2 in one move. But okay, whoops. Yeah, this is our winning zone, and it's much smaller because first of all, um, it's not as easy to checkmate the king in the center like it was with queen d2, like we were seeing before. Additionally, because the king is on this side, it has direct access to the corner, so it pretty much never has to go in front of its pawn. So we never get a chance to bring our king a little bit closer. Okay, so like I said, on e4, even though it seems very close, white's not winning. And that's because the king needs to be able to either um, access the g3 square in one move or access um, basically some square where you can set up, sorry, or access like e2 in one move, which we'll see in a second. Yes, you need to either access g3 in one move or e2 in one move. And again, like we don't have time to spare because we never get our free king move from the king going in front of the pawn because it's on the correct side. So e4, it looks very close, but it's not winning. We'll look at first queen a2. If queen to g7, again, you can try as you want, but black is not going to be obligated to bring the king in front. Now, in this case, if we had the ability to play, if, for example, if the king were on d3, if we could go king e2 in one move, obviously, yeah, we just win the pawn because the king is cut off from where it needs to be. But it's on e4, so since black is starting the queen, you can't do anything really besides giving a check or going here or something when black could just hop back and you have no way to progress. The other try is queen a2, king g1. And now, for example, if you try to do what we saw before, like this, it doesn't do anything because you've queen d3 checks. You would need the queen to be somewhere more effective, like here or something where you would lack this check. And again, what you would need if the king were on f4, for example, you'd be able to play king to g3, f1 queen, queen h2. So that's the king being too far away. And now we'll just see examples of, again, this is the winning zone. Obviously, e2 is included in the winning zone because that's where the king is trying to get. On d3, it can access e2 in one turn. So queen here. And okay, if king h1, again, we've got a very simple one with king e2. if they go in front. Okay, got another simple win, for example, like this. Okay, queen g3 wins. The thematic way to do it is this. But okay, it wins very easily regardless. Again, like I said, access to e2 in one move is a win. Access to g3 in one move is a win. And in this case, we can do it again here. King f3. Okay. If you go directly to, obviously this doesn't help after king g3. You go directly here. I can go here and mate with queen h2. Or equally, you can go here and I can still go here and we'll mate with queen h2. So king f3 is an attempt, but it doesn't work. Queen here, stopping the pawn from promoting, and it sets up king g2, queen e2, and then you get the same thing here. And on promoting the pawn, queen h2 is mate. Okay. Next up, we will have sort of an example of a trick that white can try where the king is outside the winning zone. And this position is presented. We'll switch the pawn over to the other thing. I've indicated the winning zone. The ability to be able to access just the ability to set up mate on a2, like after queen, if we have our king on b3, queen a2 mate is very important. So if this position is a draw, because our king's not close enough to set up that mate, and the king is on the correct side, closer to the corner. But white can create some practical problems, and it is worth being aware of this sort of thing. Queen b3 check. Now, obviously, king c1 would be wrong, so king a1, queen e3, king b1, queen e4, king b2, queen a1 is also a draw, but let's take king b2 for now, and queen e2. So white's trying to set up a trick, and here it's very easy for black to go wrong, and it's the sort of plausible way to lose is very similar to sort of setups that we've looked at before. The correct move here is king a1, and I'll show why in a minute, why that's a better move than king b1. So king b1 would lose after king c4, and after black queens, king b3. And this is a typical kind of bunched up scenario where white's starting in mate. The queen is close enough. If it were over here, you would have queen e3 check, and there's nothing really you can do about it, and black loses. And the reason why king to a1 is preferable, if you try this same thing, you have more room, so you can actually just answer queen b1, and you can just make a draw very simply. So that's sort of the obvious, the moves that are perhaps most likely to occur to you. King b1, a very logical move, but it loses. It's not like a super fancy trick. You just have to remember this idea of even when black queens, and even if we don't have mate the second black queens, there's still the option to set this up. And it's pretty easy to figure out in these sorts of situations whether black loses or not, just based on whether they have check or not. Otherwise, you'll be hard pressed to stop the mate. And if the king is on a1, you have a check. So that's good for black, or good enough to make a draw. There's another attempt with king c3, and if white were to play something like it prevents the king from coming closer, so in some sense it's logical. If white played queen e1 or something, you could go back to b2, and if white tried this again, you'd have another opportunity to make the right move. But okay, the move that wins is maybe not the first move you think of, perhaps. Maybe it is. But it's very logical given what we've talked about. And the move is queen e5 check. And the point is that the king can no longer run back to the correct side. It has to now go to d2, which is not where it wants to be. If you went to b3, queen a1 takes control over the queen square and you win. So king d2, and now given that the king being on the wrong side of the pawn gives us kind of an extended winning zone, we're now inside it, and we can win like this. For example, king here. We get our one free move with the king, and then we can checkmate. like this. Again, I'm not showing the lines where they make a knight because those win pretty easily. I mean, it's sort of the end of, a situation where you've started with everything in the center and you've got just to the end stage of it and you'll get mate in a few moves. Now, we will look at a few compositions involving queen versus bishop pawn. Um, More so, these are in the realm of sort of just like cute endgame studies to look at rather than endgame theory that you kind of have to know. Um, but it's interesting, like if you set up the pieces in just the right way, there are some unusual resources that pop up. So they are interesting to look at. These composed positions, I found them on endgame.md, which is sort of a database of endgame studies. This study is by N. Grigoriev from 1932. And here is how we figure this out. So of course, if you want to try to solve it yourself, you can pause the video. I'm going to show the answer now. If you go queen to a3 check, for example, which is an obvious move. After king d2, white's king is not inside the winning zone, even though the king is on the wrong side, because yeah, you're not in time to get to a square that supports queen e2 mate, and trying to do this thing doesn't work because you're not in time with this because there's immediate thing going on here. Okay, so queen d5 check. This is the only check that wins. Um, and actually, the biggest challenge for white is the sort of unusual looking move king e3. There's only one way to actually exploit it, and it's perhaps not immediately obvious. So if we look at some more logical moves, first of all, this loses simply to queen d4 check. You have to go to b3, and then queen a1 grabs control over the queening square. King e2 is maybe the most logical looking move, but here we can set up a mating net. We have queen a2, and this is why we needed to do it this way, because after king d1, king d4, we do have our mating net, and because the queen wasn't on b2, we did have time to put our king closer. So the not the best move because all moves lose, but king e3 is maybe the most tricky move. For example, queen here doesn't achieve anything after king here because again you only really have this, and then you're not in time because c1 comes with tempo. The winning move is queen g2, seemingly allowing black to queen. But okay, once you've seen the move, the point becomes obvious. c1 queen and queen g5 check. When it picks off the queen. And if you refuse to queen, your only other move is this. But you have queen here, which wins for white. I don't expect you to be able to replicate this theme, this exact theme, in a game, but it's just sort of nice to look at. The next study, we start with a pawn race to get to the sort of relevant situation. Um, this is a study by Pogosyants in 1977. Here we'll see white drawing when he quote unquote shouldn't because of a kind of unique trick. So we'll start with f6, black queens, and f7. And here, black is um, inside the winning zone by playing king g5. And if the game continued normally, you could go, for example, um, okay, let's say king g8, queen c4, king here, 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 and you could go king g6. So under normal circumstances, the queen h7 mate, under normal circumstances, the king is indeed close enough. However, in this exact alignment of pieces, white can actually just promote anyway because of this be in stalemate. So yeah, that's an interesting trick. And by the way, if black tries to avoid the stalemate, since the king is on the correct side, e5 is not within the winning zone. Again, this is sort of more in line with the sort of theoretical stuff that we covered that is much more likely to pop up in a game. unlike this like exact stalemate trick, which is not applicable in the majority of setups. So yeah, after king e5, you don't win. So king's on the right side. Queen here, for example, king h8, queen f3, here. And not really much you can do following this. You're not able to win the game with black. Now, we'll finish this bit up about queen versus pawn by looking at some examples where the pawn is actually behind the seventh rank. Now, in the majority of cases, this wins for the attacker, but not in every single case. Um, now, okay, here's sort of just a random example, um, with no real special themes that shows us winning pretty comfortably with the queen. Obviously, if it were black's turn, they could play f2 and it would be a draw. Um, and you might think that white's king is so far away that at some point black might get to push his pawn and white's king would still be outside the drawing zone. But actually, you never really get to do that. So, for example, you can basically use the same technique that you used in the pawn in the seventh position. King goes in front, we bring the king closer, and you rinse and repeat. And there's obviously no stalemate trick with the pawn here rather than here because queen takes f3 is not going to be stalemate with yeah, under normal circumstances. Okay, here's a special case. We've seen something like this earlier. In that version, we had black had a center pawn on the seventh rank, and white wasn't able to stop promotion because you had no check and no pin. Um, this is similar, except instead of being unable to prevent promotion, white's not able to prevent c2. When once black plays that, it's a draw because white's king is too far away. White has no checks, no pins, and just for example, a move with her king, white's king is not close enough to win the game, even with black's king on the wrong side. Here's a study, which is interesting, by Pogosyan again, 1981. And in this case, we'll see white winning with the queen against a pawn in the third rank, but it's a little bit more interesting. So queen g7. Um, in this case, after king to f1, white is actually not able to force king f2. And like you can continue check and so on, but you actually can't force black's king to step it directly in front of its pawn, which means that you will continue to threaten f2, with potentially a draw depending on where the king is. Okay, if you went to h2, then the idea would be pretty simple. You got the king in front of the pawn, king b5, and you can keep going with that sort of thing until you win the game. In this case, after king f1, yeah, I mean, you can on queen a1, for example, queen here. If you check along here, black can play f2, and if you check back here, you have king f1. And in fact, you have to allow the pawn to go to f2, but it's not actually a problem. King b5, f2, and king c4, and we'll see a situation. It's like one of the ones we've seen before, the one where white played queen g5 to stop the king from going to the correct side. You're forced to go back to the wrong side, and therefore white's king is close enough. Queen g3, king e2, here, and then of course be careful not to do this, king d3, which would be a draw after f1 queen, but king c3, and then after f1 queen, queen to d2. One more example. In this case, it's a study by again Pogosyans in 1981. And again, we'll see a situation where it's a little bit trickier. We start with, of course, if it were black's turn, f2, it's a draw. Queen h8 check, king g2, and now actually white only has one move to win. Obviously, that one move to win is not queen b2 check because of f2. It's not king c6 because you're not close enough after f2, and it's actually not queen g7 either because after king to f1, we see a situation similar to what we got the previous time, but in this case, white's king is not close enough. So after queen a1, because again, we have to allow f2. There's no way to stop black from doing that without just giving perpetual check. And our king is not close enough in the resulting situation. King g2, nothing else you can do really. And after this, f2, it's a draw because you are not close enough. In the previous situation, we had the king on c4, and we could set up our mate with queen d2, but in this case, the king is not within the winning zone. And the issue actually was white's move queen g7, and the more precise move is queen g8. And the reason why this is more precise is after king f1. Again, we saw the winning way. If the king goes here, you just keep checking the king closer. Eventually, you can make him go in front of the pawn. After king f1, we have a diagonal check, and that's very important because we can now make the king go in front of the pawn. We have a diagonal check rather than just having these lateral checks and these vertical checks. And here, if king e1, then queen e4 forks and forces here, and we can bring the king closer. And if king g2, then we have queen g4 forcing the king here, and then the king can come closer. And again, it's a very typical scenario um, where white wins the game. So that's the queen versus pawn section. It took a little bit longer to cover that than I guess I was hoping for. But yeah, I have this additional chapter called practice, but I didn't actually provide practice problems because there are 4 units on the board. You can place the pieces down where you feel like and try to work out the answer. So you can do that basically as many times as you want, sort of as long as you know where to put stuff generally to provide a position that's competitive that you can't like evaluate within a split second. And yeah, that's a wrap up for the queen versus pawn section. And afterwards, I'll move on to rook versus pawn.